Ever feel
Like your brain's stuck on a horror movie marathon.
and you're the only one watching?
Haha, yeah.
Today we're really going deep.
Like behind the scenes of fear and anxiety with neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux
Okay.
and his book, Anxious.
Ledoux's work is really interesting.
Like he really changes how we think about
How we understand these emotions, you know?
Yeah.
It's not so much about...
like facing down a saber-toothed tiger anymore.
Right.
Although, I mean, he talks about that too. It's like,
Yeah.
I know doom scrolling.
Before bed probably isn't helping me sleep.
Uh-huh.
But, like, what's the actual science behind why my brain seems...
Like hardwired to freak out over every little thing.
Yeah. A lot of it is...
Really understanding the difference between...
fear and anxiety,
Yeah.
which Ledoux says...
We often use kind of interchangeable.
Yeah.
Like, is there even a difference?
Between stage fright?
And just like being nervous about starting something new.
That's a great question.
Ledoux, actually, he would say.
Those are two totally different experiences.
Okay.
So he defines FIMR as that immediate, like...
Heart-pounding fight or flight response.
to like a real present danger, you know? Like that saber-toothed tiger we were talking about.
Okay.
Anxiety, on the other hand, that lives...
In the land of what ifs.
Okay.
It's that...
It's that feeling of anticipatory dread. Like, you know, that knot in your stomach when you think about...
things that might happen in the future.
Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense.
So fear is like being chased by the tiger.
Anxiety is like worrying about maybe
So you
running
have-
into a tiger on your walk later.
Yeah. Doesn't Ledoux also kind of
Challenge that whole area.
of a fear center in the brain?
He does, yeah.
I thought the amygdala was like...
The designated freakout zone?
Right, so yeah, for a long time.
The amygdala was kind of labeled as.
The brain's fear center, but Ledoux's own research.
Especially with rats.
Using Pavlovian fear conditioning
Okay.
made him really question that. Like,
That oversimplification. You know, he argues that calling it...
the fear system is kind of misleading.
So it's not...
A dedicated scream room
Well-
in the brain's basement.
Not exactly.
It's more like
Think of the amygdala.
a really sensitive security system.
Okay.
That's working, you know, behind the scenes. It's constantly kind of scanning.
For potential threats.
Right.
But it doesn't necessarily...
So you get the conscious feeling of fear itself.
Okay.
It's more...
Sending out signals. Like, hey, something's up here.
Okay, so
If the amygdala is sending out the
it's
alarm
interpreting it.
as I'm terrified versus like,
Better pay attention.
that is where...
Ledoux's concept of cognitive constructions comes
Hey.
in.
Okay.
It's like
Our conscious mind.
it's trying to make sense of these
These non-conscious signals from the amygdala.
after the fact, basically.
Okay.
So the actual feeling of fear,
That we experience is more our brain's...
interpretation of those signals,
Okay.
rather than a direct result.
Of the signals themselves.
So it's like our brain is playing catch up,
Yeah.
trying to explain
These feelings. Exactly. And
Through a
sometimes
conscious mind
it's a little...
carried away with the story it creates.
Right.
Like turning a whisper of,
Be alert into a full-blown panic attack.
wow.
This reminds me of some fascinating work.
Ledoux did with split brain patients.
Split brain patients.
Okay, now this is
Where it gets really interesting.
right.
Tell me more.
So essentially, these are
These are individuals who've had
the connection between.
the two hemispheres of their brain severed. And what's so fascinating
Is how this split.
affects their responses to threats.
You mean like
One side of their brain,
know something's up, but
the other side doesn't.
precisely, yeah.
So Ledoux, he describes this experiment.
Where
A picture of a snake is shown.
only to the right hemisphere of
Okay.
a split brain patient,
Okay.
the right hemisphere, just so you know.
It controls the left side of the body.
And it's more involved in processing.
Visual and emotional information.
Okay, so they see the snake.
Or at least their right hemisphere does.
Right.
What happens next?
Okay, so here's where it gets.
Here's where it gets kind of wild.
Okay,
The patient, right.
they might reach for a toy snake
What?
with their left hand.
Wow. Even
Their left hemisphere, which is
responsible for language
right,
and conscious thought.
remains.
Completely unaware of having seen the image.
Hold on.
So their hand is acting on a threat.
That their conscious mind.
Doesn't even register.
Yeah, isn't that wild?
That's both incredible and a little creepy.
It is, but it really highlights.
Well, much of our mental activity, right, especially when it comes to threat detection.
Happens like beneath the surface.
Of our awareness.
Wow.
And Ledoux, he argues that
The conscious mind is constantly
like trying to weave a narrative
Yeah.
to explain these
non-conscious processes.
okay.
Even if those narratives
aren't always accurate.
wow, so we're not even
Fully in control.
of our own fear responses.
It's kinda, yeah.
It feels like there's this
Whole other operating system running in the background.
Speaking of operating systems,
Ledoux also talks about how these
fear and anxiety responses
are really deeply rooted.
in our evolutionary history, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He dives into this concept of
Survival circuits, which are basically
pre-programmed responses to danger.
that we share with,
Countless other species.
Okay.
These circuits are what helps
Our ancestors survive
yeah,
in a world full of
like very real threats
right.
back then.
So those ancient instincts,
The survival circuits
Uh-huh.
are still with us,
even if we're not,
facing down woolly mammoths every day.
exactly. Yeah, and
While these circuits were,
super important for survival back then.
right.
They can be
a little overzealous in our modern world, right?
right.
Like triggering that,
Fight or flight response.
I mean, situations that
might not actually
life or death,
which explains why.
that near miss fender bender can leave me like
Totally rattled for hours afterward.
right.
Even if
Logically, I know it wasn't a big deal.
it's like our brains
Haven't quite caught up to the fact that
a traffic jam.
isn't a hunting lion.
Right.
But
Here's where it
gets even more interesting.
okay.
Even our memories,
of these threats, the
Yeah.
way we store and recall
those scary experiences,
are more fluid.
than we might realize.
Okay.
Ledoux actually shares
Pretty funny story and
in Anxious about this.
oh yeah.
What's the story?
Okay.
So he talks about how
after his research on this thing called
reconsolidation in rats.
okay.
He actually had people coming up to him asking if he could, like,
Erase their memories.
wait,
Erase their memories. Something out of a sci-fi movie.
aha, right.
It does sound kind of wild.
Yeah.
But their request
Actually came from
of misunderstanding.
of how this reconsolidation process works.
Okay, so what is reconsolidation?
Exactly. Okay, so
And why did people think
Ledoux had
crack the code to
selective amnesia.
Okay, so reconsolidation is
This fascinating process.
where memory, right, when we
Mhm.
retrieve them,
They come.
temporarily open to change.
Okay.
It's like if you can imagine
Opening a file.
on your computer
Mhm.
that you can then,
Edit and save over. So it's not about like
deleting the file entirely.
like changing the font or
Yeah,
adding some footnotes.
precisely.
And what Ledoux found in his research,
Was that,
disrupting this reconsolidation process
okay,
in rats.
during that window of
Vulnerability
Yeah.
could actually weaken
Or even block the retrieval.
of a specific fear memory.
wow, that's incredible.
But if memories can be like,
absurd like that.
doesn't that mean they're not?
Always reliable.
That's exactly what Ledoux argues.
Wow.
He uses the example.
Of eyewitness testimony,
right.
which we often think of as
This gold standard of evidence.
right.
But the reality is,
Every time we recall a memory,
mhm,
we're not just
actively replaying it,
but also potentially
shaping it. Okay.
based on
Or current mindset,
Mhm.
our biases, even the questions.
we're asked.
So it's like playing a giant game of telephone with our own minds.
Right.
No wonder
Huh.
eyewitness accounts can be,
So inconsistent.
yeah,
But if our memories are
this malleable, this like,
open to change
what does that mean?
for managing anxiety,
That's a great question.
can we actually
Rewire those fear responses.
using this
reconsolidation.
now you're thinking like a neuroscientist. Ledoux, he suggests that
Exposure therapy,
which have been shown to be
very effective.
for anxiety disorders,
Right.
might actually be working by
Tapping into this reconsolidation process.
so instead of trying to
The
those scary memories completely,
right.
which
Seems like it could have.
its own set of problems,
Totally.
like we can actually change
react.
to
Exactly.
exactly, and
That's a much more, I think,
realistically,
frankly, more humane approach.
Right. Our memories,
Even the painful ones.
right, are part of who we are.
Right.
And so instead of trying to
erase
It's exposure therapy.
helps us
Like create a new
break
relationship.
out those memories.
I like that.
So how does exposure therapy
Actually work.
in practice
So it involves
gradually and repeatedly,
confronting the things that trigger your anxiety.
but in a safe
Right.
and controlled environment?
Okay.
Right. So
Let's say,
you have a fear of spiders,
okay.
right?
Mhm.
Exposure therapy might start with you, like,
Looking at pictures of spiders.
okay,
Right. And then maybe
watching videos
Yeah.
of spiders, and eventually
working your way up to like,
being in the same room
Right.
as a real spider.
I could see how that would be
Kind of terrifying.
at first.
Right.
But I guess the
Like
idea
the
is
spider.
by like repeatedly exposing yourself.
To the spider
Right.
without anything bad happening.
Your brain will start to get the message that
Exactly.
maybe spider
Aren't as threatening.
as it thought.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You're essentially
Leaving your amygdala, right?
Mhm.
That
super sensitive security system we talked about.
right.
The opportunity to like,
Update its threat assessment.
okay,
And so over time
where your fear response
starts to,
diminish,
because your brain is learning that
the trigger,
right
in this case, the spider.
isn't actually dangerous.
That makes sense.
But what about something like
Generalized anxiety.
where there isn't like
A
an
specific
object or situation to like
expose yourself to.
Right.
How do you apply these ideas?
when the anxiety is more like
Free floating.
that's a great question.
In Ledoux, he addresses this
Directly and anxious.
Okay.
He introduces this concept of
Proactive avoidance.
proactive avoidance.
It
Sounds counterintuitive at first, but it's actually about
actively
shaping your environment
okay.
to minimize.
Potential triggers.
So it's less about like
Right.
avoiding life altogether.
And more about being
Strategic
about
and
what you're inviting
into your space.
Exactly. Yeah, it's about
And mindful of your
personal triggers
Mhm.
and finding ways to
manage them.
right.
Right.
So for example,
If you know that,
watching the news before bed tends to
spike your anxiety.
mhm.
Maybe you,
listen to a relaxing podcast instead.
right.
Or
Well, social media is a trigger.
mhm.
You set some,
boundaries around
Yeah.
how often you check it.
or who you follow.
It's like creating
A mental sanctuary.
right.
A place where you feel
Safe and in control.
exactly.
And it
What's
seems like
what's the big one?
plays a big role.
In managing anxiety,
hmm
according to Ledoux.
Absolutely. Ledoux talks about how
All those practices like
meditation, right,
Hmm.
can be incredibly powerful tools.
for managing anxiety
Right.
because they help us
Develop a greater awareness of our thoughts
our feelings and
without getting
be swept away by it.
what's instead of trying to
Push those anxious thoughts away,
right,
which never seems to work anyway. Mindfulness is more about
learning to kind of
observe them.
without letting them take over,
Exactly. Yeah, it's about
creating some space
Right.
between you.
and those thoughts
hmm
and recognizing that
Just because you're having a thought
Right.
doesn't make it true.
rights.
Right. You get to choose.
Should you respond?
That's such a
Powerful
in
shit.
perspective.
It
It's
is.
my anxiety
Like,
break.
experiencing it and that awareness
That ability to
choose my response
feels
really freeing. It is freeing, yeah.
and it's something that
Ledoux really emphasizes, I think,
throughout
anxious.
okay,
He's not saying
that we can
think our way out of
anxiety completely,
Right.
These
the
are
ancient hardwired responses we're talking about,
Right.
But by
under
science behind them,
we can start to
Thinking
a
stuff,
different relationship
right?
with those feeling
Like Ledoux is giving us,
a user's manual
yeah,
for our own brains.
right,
We're not just
at the mercy automatic responses anymore.
Exactly.
And with that understanding,
Mistake.
a sense of empowerment.
Right.
It's not about,
Eliminating anxiety.
entirely.
Right.
But it's about
Recognizing those anxious thoughts as
signals,
right.
not necessarily facts.
Oh, okay.
And then choosing.
How we want to respond to them.
Sometimes
That response might be to take action.
like
trying exposure therapy
Yeah.
or practicing mindfulness.
when sometimes it might just be about
Acknowledging the anxiety,
Yeah.
giving it a little space.
and trusting that
it will eventually pass.
I got it. It's about finding work, what works for you,
Yeah.
what helps you feel,
more grounded,
Right.
and in control,
Right.
and that's gonna look different for everyone.
Right.
The important thing is to
Approach
anxiety with a sense of
curiosity and compassion rather than judgment.
Speaking of curiosity,
I have one
final thought I wanted to
leave our listeners with.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about how
do describe
our conscious experience of fear as kind of a
cognitive construction, like
yeah.
our mind creates to
make sense of
those non-conscious signals.
right, like our brains attempt to
You have to explain
our heart is racing,
right,
or our palms are sweating.
Exactly.
But if that's the case,
if those feelings
are being interpreted
through this lens
of our own making,
what happens
when we start to
question that story?
That's a good question.
What if, like,
instead of seeing anxiety
as the enemy, we started to see it as
an opportunity
to learn more about ourselves,
okay,
our triggers,
our deepest fears and desires?
That's a powerful question.
It makes me think about how often
we try to, like,
suppress or avoid those uncomfortable feelings,
right,
when maybe
the real growth
comes from
leaning into them, from like
getting curious about what they might be
trying to tell us.
Right. Maybe anxiety isn't
always trying to
like sabotage us.
Right. Maybe in its own weird way.
It's trying to
protect us
or point us
in a different direction. And maybe, just maybe,
and by listening a little more closely
to those anxious whispers, we might actually find ourselves
on a path to
greater self-awareness,
resilience, and even, dare I say it,
peace.
That's a beautiful thought to end on.
And I think it really
definitely encapsulates
the empowering message
at the heart of Ledoux's work.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So
to everyone out there navigating
ups and downs, remember, you're not alone.
Your brain is amazing,
even when it's driving you a little crazy.
And with a little knowledge
and passion
and a little curiosity,
navigate those
waves
with more grace.
Maybe even
a little bit of humor.
I love that.
Until next time, keep diving deep.